I find it very welcome that Friedrich Merz is traveling to Belgium at short notice today, if I understood the press correctly, and might even already be on his way, if I see it correctly, to talk with Bart de Wever about how we can use the legally possible ways to mobilize additional funds for Ukraine. That is correct, esteemed colleagues. Additional funds, I emphasize explicitly, must be exactly that, namely additional. They should not simply replace existing aid. And that is why we wish Chancellor Merz good luck in the discussions in Belgium. However, despite agreement on the direction in this proposal, we unfortunately cannot support the proposal of the Greens. I would, of course, like to explain that. I would like to do so on 2 points. Just a day before yesterday, the EU Commission presented very concrete proposals to actually make use of the Russian assets, to use them, while the Greens proposal, as becomes clear from the headline, demands a complete transfer of the assets, which is at least legally unclear under international law and thus very problematic. The EU Commission shows in their proposal how the use could be made legally secure through the model of a so-called reparations loan, a model in which the assets remain frozen, and Ukraine only has to repay this loan if Russia pays reparations. Otherwise, the frozen assets are used. This allows the use of these frozen assets, but does not equate to a direct expropriation, and thus takes state immunity into account, which is also important for us elsewhere, dear colleagues. Unfortunately, the Greens' proposal demands exactly what I have just described, against which several EU legal services, as well as international lawyers, have warned us.
Confidence in the euro would disappear, funds would flow out, and the consequences for the status of the euro, and this from the mouth of a Eurocritic and a Eurosceptic, would be unclear for our currency and the many people who have saved in it. Do you not care about any of this anymore? Do you not care about any of this anymore? German interests should be the top priority in the Parliament's decision. Mr. Merz, when he travels to Belgium to break the Belgians' resistance, is no longer concerned with German interests. And there, I think you should all on the left side in Parliament be ashamed, ladies and gentlemen. In this so-called deal, there is nothing for Germany to gain. And again, we will never place morality above the law. Therefore, we reject any access to Russian state assets and the assets of private Russian savers, ladies and gentlemen.
We must continue to steadfastly support Ukraine out of solidarity and from our own German and European security interests. A success for Russia in Ukraine would be a disastrous signal for the Baltic states, for our partners on NATO's eastern flank, and for the entire European security order.
Russia shows no serious willingness to compromise. However, if negotiations lead to no result and sanctions have so far been only partially effective, then we must, ladies and gentlemen, raise the cost of this war, which violates international law for Russia. That is precisely what today's debate is about. At this point, it is very welcome that the democratic parties in this House share the same goal, namely to enable and financially support Ukraine in the long term.
The Finance Committee recommends with its recommendation for decision on printed matter 19 to 3080 for the rejection of the motion of the Bundestag Die Grünen faction on printed matter 19 to 572 titled Frozen Russian State Assets to be fully allocated to Ukraine. The Finance Committee's recommendation, 7th Committee, on the motion by MP Robin Wagner, Alliance 90 of the Greens, frozen Russian state assets, make them fully available to Ukraine. Document 1930-84 and 21-572. Submitted voting cards 585. Voted in favor 455. Against 77. And there were 53 abstentions. Thus, the recommendation is adopted. I may point out that we are at the end of our agenda.